Hello everyone and welcome to Tech with Robert to get started with the T-SQL course. In this lecture I'm going to show you some tips and tricks on how you can debug and analyze different joins. But before we get started, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, give a comment and leave a like if you like what I do. So without further ado, let's dive right in. As I've mentioned a couple of times in previous lectures, there are going to be a lot of scenarios where you will, your colleagues or your people in your organization will use the data in your database, and they're going to write a lot of queries or use queries to create some reports in different tools like Excel and Power BI. And sometimes the data there is gonna be wrong. For example, you can have a sales executive or just someone from customer sales coming in and saying, "Oh, I think that there's something wrong with this data. I think that the sales is a lot higher or lower than what we expect," and so on. And they're gonna ask you to look into it. And the first step that you do, I've sort of built up a small system that I use to try and a lot easier to find about the bugs and stuff, because if you just take the query and run it, paste it in the management studio and just run the whole query, which is probably going to contain a lot of different joins and a lot of complicated calculations, and it's going to be very hard to just run the whole query and then saying, okay, here is the bug, this is the problem. And so what I like to do is I like to go through join by join, because as we've seen in the previous lectures where we talked about joins, you need to be careful when you're using joins, and you really need to understand all of the different joins before you use them, because otherwise you will get unexpected results. And so first of all, what I like to do is I have this step-by-step approach here to break a large problem into smaller problems, and then I'm going through join by join. And so the absolute first step that I always do is I define the expected number of rows that I will get. So in this table, for example, sales table or whatever, I always start up by using the count function to see how many rows do we have here. And unless otherwise specified, if there's some filters and stuff, I just make sure that I apply all of those filters in the beginning with the, I select count star from this table, and then I do all of the where filters if there are any. Otherwise, we just want to say that we want to get all of the rows from that table. And so then I take the join, the first join, and I say, okay, do we get fewer rows? Because we can either get fewer rows when we apply join to the first table, or we can get more rows, or we can get the same amount of rows. And so if we get fewer rows, I will see, is that okay? Like, for example, say that I do an inner join from the sales table to the customer table, and then there are some customer IDs in the sales table and I don't find a match in the customer table. And sometimes that can happen and it's perfectly valid. And so I will ask, is that okay? And if that is okay, then we can switch from, let's say, an inner join to a left join, because then we will just say, okay, we're doing an inner join now and we're losing some customers and some transactions, but this is okay. So we can just switch it from an inner join to a left join, and then we will get everything from the sales table, even though we don't get a match in the customers table. But if that's not okay, then it means that there's an error, because we should get a match on all of the customers from our transactions, but we don't. So then, in order for yourself or the person in your company that's responsible for the source system where those rows are fetched from, you need to provide information. You cannot say that, oh, I found out that there are some customers that we don't find a match on in the customers table. Like, what is your colleague gonna do with that? You need to extract the information, so get the info about those non-matching rows, and then send a list of the values to investigate to sales responsible or the responsible for that particular system. And I'm going to show you how to do this in T-SQL, but let's say that we don't have fewer rows. So Okay, we don't have fewer rows. Then we say, do we have more rows? So when we do a join to the customer table, do we get more rows than the actual base table? If we don't do that, then we don't get fewer rows, we don't get less rows. So for now we can consider that to be okay. So then we continue to the next join. But if we do get more rows, that means that we have duplicate rows, and most likely that our join criteria is wrong. And we've taken a look at this example when we had the sales table and we only joined on the person's first name, but we found out that we had many customers with the first name of Robert, so then we needed to add the last name to make the row unique, otherwise we get duplicates. And so then we see, and there's a trick I'm going to show you with the having count star is greater than 1 trick. I'm going to show that in a second, but in the same approach here as before, we get the information about the duplicate rows, and then once we found these rows, we can see, is it safe for us to manually delete these rows, these duplicates, directly in the database? And if that's okay, we delete duplicated rows with T-SQL. And the reason why this is yellow, because I'm going to create a lecture where I show you how you can identify and then remove duplicated rows. But most of the times, in my opinion, I would say that it's better to try to investigate the source of the problem. So why are we getting these duplicate rows? Is there something wrong? Do we have to redesign our database structure, or is there something in the system? Because if we just delete these manually once, and then maybe the next day when we load data, we could get the same problem again. So we need to investigate the source of the problem. And so that is like the no answer to this question. Can we just manually delete these and be fine with it? No. And then we send a list of these duplicate values to investigate further. And what this looks like in T-SQL, we could have an example. So we're going to say that we want to select the person.personID, sorry, we're gonna do start from table person. We're gonna name it person, and then here we're gonna say person ID, person.name. We're gonna name this person name. We're gonna say person.friend ID, and then friend dot name as friend name. All right, and we're going to do an inner join, a self join to the same table here. We're going to name it friend, and then we're going to say on the person's friend ID is going to be equal to the friend's person ID. Okay, and now when we get everything here, we say okay, we get 4 rows. And so a trick that I use, let's say that this is a very, very long query with a lot of inner joins. So then what I do is, so after the last column in the select list and just before the from, I write a comment here, and I write select count star. And so then what I first do is I just run this as a subset of the whole query. So I take this select count and I use it from that table, and I see, okay, so we expect 5 rows. So then I'd make a comment here and I say 5. So the number of expected rows that I want is, I expect to get 5 rows. And so then I can continue and take the first join. So I run this same select count stars from that table, but then with the inner join. And when I run that, I say I get number 4. So here I get 4 rows. So here we are missing a row, and what we can, and how we can see that. So we want to see what row are we missing. That means that when we do this join, the inner join, we're missing out on 1 row. And so what we can do is we can write another comment here, and I select star. I copy this join here, and I just comment out the other one, and I do a left join. Okay, So the left join, and then this means that there's a null value here. So we're gonna say that we want all of the rows where the friend dot person ID is null, because the person ID field from the friends table here, that is what we're using in the join. So this means that when we do this match here, and the friends ID is equal to the person ID, we get a value where the person ID is null. So then I just do this here and I say let's query. Okay, so we see here that the person ID of Tyler with the name Tyler, this is the row. This means that something is wrong here, and we know now that this is because we don't have the person ID. So if we just say select star from the table person, we see that let me actually run these at the same time here. And so we see here that when we do the left join here, we see that okay, the person ID 5 Tyler, this is where we don't get a match, because in the original query we used an inner join, and then we didn't get this row because it didn't have it was null, it didn't have a friend ID. And so if this is okay, we can just simply switch this inner join here, the original one, to a left join. And otherwise, if this okay, yeah, but it's okay, we don't need to get everything, we want all of the customers who actually have a friend, for example, then this inner join, we can keep this inner join, and it's okay, we have verified that it's okay, that okay, we have 5 rows originally, and but when we do this join, we only get 4 rows, and that is okay. So now we have at least investigated it, and we can now delete this, and we can keep this join here. And then we could do the same thing if we had another join here. We would write the select count star on this one, and then we have verified this one, so then we go on and take a second join, and we do that process until we find out what the problem is. And it can sometimes be that the reason why some value we try to summarize from this table here is lower, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a problem, because here we found out that okay, we are missing 1 row, but it doesn't matter, it's still okay. So that explains that okay, we don't actually will get the total sum for that column, because we're not going to take every rows, we can get fewer rows. So then it doesn't necessarily have to be a problem. And so we could take another problem here is from the person's sales table. So we could say we want to select, let's say we take everything from the person sales table, and then with PS, I would say PS dot sales order ID, we want the PS dot person name, PS dot last name, and the PS dot sales amount. Okay, and we are going to do a left join to the person, name it P, on PS dot person name is equal to P dot person name. And so then when we write this query here, we see we get these 10 rows here, and we say okay, there's something wrong with this. So we do the exact same thing here. We do this comment here, we say select count star, and I start off by counting the rows from this table. So I say okay, here we get 8, so the number of expected rows that I want is 8. And now I do the same thing with this join, and when I do this join here, we get 10. So in the previous example we get fewer rows, but in this case we get more rows, so we get duplicate rows here. And this is how we can find out which rows that are duplicates. So we do the same thing here, and here we can say okay, from the persons table we have a person name, so we could say okay, we want to select the P dot person name here from this table here. And what we can do here is we can do is to where P dot person name is not null, and then we can say group by P dot person name having count star equal is greater than 1. So we'll run this query and so we see, okay, Robert. So that means that when we do this join here, when it takes the person name is equal to the person name from the person table, we find out that the person name Robert here is a duplicate. So we can further investigate and say, okay, we want to also take the person's last name, for example. Then we include it here. Let me see. Okay, so these are the rows here where we get the duplicates, and we can verify this if we just copy this query here, put it above here, and we take everything away here and just have the original query like this. So here we see that the duplicate was run these both at the same time. So we see, oh, never mind. We see we got Robert Anderson and Robert Johnson. These are the values that we get duplicates, and if we verify, we can verify this by doing here. So we see Robert Anderson and then Robert Anderson again. So this is a duplicate row here. We get this row twice, and also for Robert Johnson. But so this is how we can get those rows or duplicates, and so we can extract this list here and send to, maybe it's yourself who's responsible for that source system, then you know what data you need to investigate. So you go into that system, for example, and you see, okay, Robert Anderson, and maybe you find out that there's something wrong in the source system. You know, they have to delete a row or something, there's some business rule that you've broken or whatever, and then you reload the data. And so this is how we can, as a little trick that I use to analyze and investigate my joins. And so as you can imagine, this trick is very, very handy when you have like, okay, now we only had one join, but say we had like 10 different joins and somewhere is a problem and we don't know where. So it's a lot easier. It's going to save you countless amount of hours to be able to verify all of these joins step by step. So from join to join. And so this was it for this lecture. In the next lecture, I'm going to talk about how we can combine 2 or more query results into one query result using the union and union all. So I will see you guys in the next lecture.